Okay, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. My name's Ian Bond. I'm the head of Nottinghamshire's Adult Community Learning Service. I'm also a joint vice chair, of LEAFEA, and I've been asked to just chair this webinar this morning. I'm delighted to do so. Normally it would be Jackie Bradley who's the chair, but I think she's unavailable to do that this morning. So I'm afraid you've got the second stringer, but hopefully it'll go well. So yeah, this is going to be a really exciting and interesting event. We've got some fantastic speakers who are going to talk to us this morning, and there'll also be an opportunity for us to then get together in groups and to discuss what we've heard. And I think it's really useful because it's a very practical, focused morning, looking at one of the key areas that I think has affected all of us in terms of our practice and provision in the previous kind of 18 months or so, and is likely to be a key element going forward. So yeah, I'm welcoming this morning members from both LEAFEA and also from the European Agenda for Adult Learning. So it's nice to actually have an opportunity for colleagues from different fora to come together in one session, so that's really great. As we know, over the last year, we've been faced with that horrible word, unprecedented challenges, and I think we have had to develop a range of digital delivery options that for most of us as providers, certainly in Nottinghamshire for my service, it was, we probably made more progress in digital delivery in about 3 weeks than we would have done in 3 years normally. So necessity was the kind of mother of that invention. And today's webinar, we're going to be looking at how we can build on some of those fantastic lessons that we've learned, and what sorts of practices are we wanting to kind of take forward and embed into our future practice. And just before I introduce our first speaker, just a note on housekeeping. I think you are all doing this really wonderfully because I think everyone's so fantastically well trained now in kind of Teams and Zoom etiquette. But if you could please mute your microphones unless you are wanting to contribute, that would be really helpful just to minimize any naughty feedback. I think in terms of, we are recording the session as well in order to be able to share the session with other colleagues who weren't able to join us for the webinar this morning, which I think is fine. And I think they are the main housekeeping items I need to make you all aware of. So without further ado, I think it's now with great pleasure that I can introduce Jules Steele, who is a senior HMI for the East of England for Ofsted. And Jules is going to give us a presentation about how Ofsted has undertaken a review of online learning within further education and point us in the direction of some of the emerging practice. So over to you, Jules. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, everybody. Good to be joining you today. And thank you, Ros, as well, who suggested that we'd come along and talk. So very grateful to have the opportunity. So I've got a couple of slides. Happy to take any questions at any stage. And my first slide is really about the online learning review. So main findings, really. There was a transition stage to learning under the restrictions, and we found there were 3 main groups when we did our review. There was those folk and providers that had an emergency move to adopting online teaching tools such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Cisco, WebEx, etc. And for those teachers that continue to teach classes to learners regardless of their location. And if an information technology strategy existed at all, and in many cases it didn't, it was at the very early stages of its development. The second group we saw had an existing IT strategy and the tools were already present, and in some cases were being used to a greater or lesser extent. They used that quickly to face-to-face teaching, to replace that face-to-face teaching, although the on-site teaching remained an issue because the existing tools were more of enhancement between the lessons. But teaching happened synchronously, but it had more of a joined up feel, and it was sort of moving on. And as Ian says, suddenly coming into that stage of developing your strategy very quickly. And and I can truly say, and all my senior colleagues have echoed this, you know, the marvellous thing about the sector is people just step up and do whatever they can do. It doesn't matter how high the sector needs to jump, it just jumps there to respond to its students and its learners. And that was just another example of them being so, you know, you would be so marvellous and working towards that. Quite a few of the providers that we went to look at did have a digital learning as a priority. So for them, there was less change, and I think they made the adaptations perhaps slightly more quickly. They'd already started recording lessons, for example. They already had presentations or approaches where they would be often providing training to geographically dispersed areas. So they would have learners that were in the centres as well as learners in other centres that they were communicating that learning at the same time. And they're sort of building up on that collection of lessons for later use if needed. But they also already had a strategy of using recordings of teaching and learning and assessment as a revision tool for learners. And we found this was often very prevalent for high level apprenticeship programs in particular, did that very successfully. I think it's probably fair to say that everybody found adapting to the conditions of the COVID-19 restrictions, or everyone in the category, the third category, found those adaptations quite easy for them. But for those providers whose apprentice experience of the provision was you know, relatively unchanged from that perspective, but nevertheless, we've seen the whole range from providers that had nothing at all in place that responded very quickly to put some digital learning in place, to those that had a very strong picture of doing that anyway. We've had reflections from the sector, and everybody that's here will be saying that, you know, the digital poverty and the poor and inconsistent connectivity continue to be a problem for very many providers and very, very many learners. And we heard really quite heroic examples of providers going out, buying laptops, buying dongles, doing all sorts of things to enable learning to continue in some way, shape or form. But we do need to, I think that there's sector-wide recognition of the fact that digital poverty and poor and inconsistent connectivity is, you know, remains to be a very strong feature for us. You know, staff and learners use digital tools that they're unfamiliar with. They've become far more adept and confident to use technology. But I think that also another thing that was reflected to us was how leaders and managers and staff were reflecting how they weren't sure how to assure themselves that learning was taking place. So they know that learners are logging on, but are learners actually digesting learning and having an active experience? That came across quite strongly. And also the amount of training that providers have put in place to upskill and support teaching and assessing staff to provide the training that they wanted to do. So most providers, when talking about digital poverty, most providers have reported that the broadband infrastructure is an ongoing barrier. It is something that's been reflected back from our work to the Department for Education, and certainly other groups have lobbied very strongly to make government recognise the fact that this is an ongoing barrier for the sector. And there's also, in some instances, we found in our review that there was a lack of understanding of the limitations of technology, really and truly, to ensure that learning was happening and was active and was in the way, shape and form that you would ideally hope it would be. Safeguarding and online safety was an interesting element that was picked out. Most providers reviewed and updated the information of online safety that they gave to their learners and staff. And in a few cases, we saw some good practice where online safety code of conduct has been created and has been really used very effectively. Most providers that we've spoken to at the time of this review and subsequently have reported that there's been additional online safety training has gone on for their staff and for their learners. And the most common subjects around that additional training has been around cyberbullying, identity theft, which is quite a concern, particularly around for adult learners have reflected this, the digital footprint and password protection and email scams, and that quite a few providers are putting in place a new induction. So in September, there was quite a lot of work done on new inductions and then subsequent cohorts of learners coming through to give them an online induction around being safe online, which was very heartening to see. And the online safety training has been, quite a few providers have developed that as a personal development qualification. And students and learners and apprentices have reflected to inspectors that they found that very useful. They learned lots of new things that they didn't or hadn't appreciated fully, particularly adult learners, around privacy settings, or the work that's been done to, and the discussions that's been held with learners around fake news is quite a strong thing. Fake news, scams, and being able to, enabling learners to identify and make more informed judgments about the news that they read on social media and other posts, and also how they interpret and internalize posts they see on social media. So we're seeing now, moving on as we go on and we're returning to more inspection activity, we're seeing that there's been lots of training around e-safety, purchasing online being another feature particularly that has resonated with younger learners and adult learners alike, and being careful about what they access in terms of online material, and protocols for video conferencing, and learners having a good idea about that. In terms of effective use of technology to monitor and record formative and summative assessment, we've seen some really brilliant examples of how providers have used technology very effectively to monitor and record ongoing development of learners' skills and their knowledge, and also their professional behaviours. So uses, for example, of recording assessment as it's taking place, recording, I've seen myself when I've been out in the field where assessors have been recording learners working on an engine or a gearbox, where they've even used almost like a long pole with a camera on, so that they can see in real time how the apprentices were working on taking out a gearbox and doing work to the engine, and they're watching it on camera, and then they're giving formative and summative feedback. So some really good examples, very innovative ideas that people have used out there. Filming, learning, filming, using WhatsApp, using TikTok, using all sorts of different podcasts and ways of recording, analysing, and enabling learners to think differently about how they can capture their own development and their ongoing performance. We've seen a few odd protocols, I suppose, is what we would describe it as, when we've been observing, or when providers have been conducting live video lessons. So some providers insisting that cameras are on, some providers insisting that cameras are off. We've had some interesting conversations out there, and providers have been really conscious, and staff have been really conscious that, particularly during the lockdown elements of the pandemic, learners may have been in their bedroom or somewhere private, and for them to have their camera on, you know, was that appropriate? So we've had lots of discussions around training learners to be mindful of what they reveal online, but also of using backgrounds and filters so that they can take an active part in learning and they can have their camera on. Some providers have been concerned about GDPR protocols, and have been very careful as well around when they're, particularly when something's being recorded, having sharing other people, other learners in the groups, names and identities, and they thought very carefully about that. So that's probably something to be reflecting on, really. I think that when we've seen an inconsistency in protocols across individual settings when we've been there, it is more indicative that providers haven't necessarily thought through the risks attached to live video interactions with learners, and haven't thought through how they might mitigate those risks. And thinking about, comparing what you need when you're making a live video to ensure that it's an effective learning experience. A lot of learning that we've seen has been very effective in that there's been chat boards and other functions where learners can ask questions during the sessions confidentially, and we've had very many instances where learners have disclosed to their teacher or their assessor or the member staff, who, even when they're in a very large forum, when they've disclosed safeguarding issues, because there's been that facility, that secure, confidential facility to say, I need to talk to you about something that I'm really concerned about. So the hybrid learning, particularly to overcome limitations in practical sessions, has been the first national lockdown. A lot of providers left to later on. As the pandemic progressed, providers started thinking more creative, large groups together, called sessions to small groups that are being live streamed to the remainder of the group, and where learners have been carrying out practical tasks and activities whilst their tutors are taking them through a video through the actual demonstration, and the learners doing it as well. We've seen an increased recording of lessons and meetings and events, and as Ian said right at the beginning, we've all become quite slick, haven't we, about protocols of questions in meetings, and we've seen the same thing with learners. A lot of recording of lessons and meetings. What we've seen a big increase, really, it would be fair to say, and moving on to our other work that we've been doing, that a lot of providers now are routinely recording sessions, and they use catch up at any time, join at any time, review and revise their understanding of information. Learners like that, particularly adult learners, have been very receptive to that. Adult learners and apprentices in particular, who have had to balance a great deal of, oh dear, something's just popped up. Sarah, do I need to click start my video? I've just had a pop-up on my screen.
I think we've been losing you, Jules, a little bit. There's been a few comments in the chat. I'm not sure what we can do to try and strengthen the connection, but it kind of is, you're coming and going. So maybe if you keep going, hopefully it will come good, because you started out absolutely fine, but it just in the last minute or so, it's been a bit, your connection's been a bit weaker.
Oh, I do apologise. Shall I go back and repeat some information? Where shall I go from?
I think, if you go back to the kind of hybrid learning that you were talking about, that might be helpful.
Okay, apologies, colleagues. What we found moving forward from our work and our inspection work, and to moving on from this particular review, is that very many providers have used a hybrid model of learning for their learners. So it's overcoming the limitations of practical sessions in particular. So lots of examples would be when the teacher or the assessor is demonstrating something live and the learners may not be there. They may be doing it in their work settings or at home, where small groups of learners may be in the setting, and that's being recorded for the other learners that aren't there, and they're joining in and rotoring learners through those practical sessions, where filming is being used, where learners have been in a range, particularly apprentices we've seen this with, where they've been in their own settings and they've been recording and live streaming in what they're doing, and they're in their practical sessions where they've been practicing their skills and refining their skills. So we've seen lots of good examples of that. and an increased use of recording lessons, meetings and events. And as Ian said, we're all very practiced now at the protocols of being in meetings, connectivity notwithstanding, but that learners, particularly adult learners and apprentices, are very appreciative of routine recording of lessons. They like it that they can join in the lessons at any time to suit them and around their work and caring responsibilities. They like it that they have the opportunity to revisit information and to revise and reflect on their understanding. So they're finding it a very valuable revision tool. They like the fact that they can do bite-sized chunks of learning, so they could have a recording and they could just use part of that recording and then go away and practice or reflect on the knowledge that's been there. And the fact that the recordings are there, learners are able to store it themselves and come back to it. So that's gone down extremely well with learners. The other piece of feedback that you'd be heartened to hear is that learners have universally been supportive of the incredible efforts that all of their providers have done to keep them in learning and to help them to continue on. And it's so much more than, as you know, the learning experience that they found so valuable. It's the support that they've had, the fact that providers have reached out to them and helped them with their anxieties, their fragile mental health very often, how they've helped them to manage their life circumstances around just existing throughout the pandemic. So we've had huge amounts of emails and when we're out there talking to learners, of where learners have said, you know, I could not have got through this if I didn't have the teachers and the assessors and if I didn't have this particular learning provider that I'm with and community learning, I just wouldn't have got through this. They've been my lifeline. And we've heard that so forcefully. So I wanted to take the opportunity to, I'm sure you're hearing it too, but to say how much that has really resonated with us. So I don't have anything else to talk specifically around the online review findings, but happy to take any questions before I talk about the next steps, if people would like to do that, Ian.
Yeah, or we could actually do that at the end, Jules. I think we're going to kind of pick some questions out of the chat at the end, Jules, if that's okay.
Yeah,
and then also we obviously want to hear from Ros, don't we, as well, her practical experiences of how she's implemented some of this work as well would be great. So yeah, over to you, Jules. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, when Sarah and Alex and I were talking, we thought that you might welcome an overview really of the next steps for Ofsted. So we've changed our handbook made some minor amendments to the handbook to reflect the online learning that we've seen. That has been, you know, all the very positive elements there. And inspectors have had a lot of training on what to look for and the good things that we've been seeing as part of our pilot activity, but also as part of this review. We're looking to return to the education inspection framework. Ros was one of the providers that very kindly agreed to pilot us doing this. What we're looking to do is, as an organisation, given that the education inspection framework, or EAF, was conceived and very well researched in the pre-pandemic world, we need to make sure that the methodology that we're adopting is appropriate for a post-pandemic world. We want to make sure that when we go out there and we make judgments, that providers that are having their judgments post-pandemic can be secure that when we're saying they're good, they are good. They're not almost good, they're good. Good is good and outstanding is outstanding. So it's been really important to us that we've done a lot of pilots. Initially, we had what we thought was a comprehensive sample, but coming out of the pilot have been lots of things that we've needed to reflect on, go away and think about, change, put more training in place, and decided that we needed to do very many more pilots than we originally planned to do. And that's so important because we've had our research and evaluation team alongside us for all of the pilots, and our policy team looking very carefully at how the evidence across the pilots that we've done have emerged, what we were able to make judgments on, what things we perhaps had challenges making judgments upon. And that has led to more pilots. So an example of that would be, we've taken a sector by sector approach in post-16. So we've done pilots to all the different elements that make up post-16, so apprenticeship providers, adult education providers, community learning, independent specialist colleges, large colleges, small colleges, and everything in between. And we found that some of the challenges we had at the time of doing the pilots were where learners were still in their bubbles for all the good health and safety reasons around protecting them from developing COVID, has impacted in some instances on how training and learning has occurred, and naturally the learning has come second to keeping learners safe. So that's presented challenges that we've had to go back and reflect upon. So our research and evaluation team have been out with us. They've gone over every single evidence card that we've written and have asked lots of questions. And those pilots are continuing. I think we've even got some out that are happening this week as well. So we had originally thought that our pilot activity would finish probably a couple of months, well, certainly 6 weeks ago, but we just carried on piloting. And I think it's important that we do. Everybody, we need to have the confidence, and the sector needs to have the confidence that what we're going to come out with is what's right. And if we need to make any adaptations to the education inspection framework, that those are well researched, evidence-based, and support the approach that we're going to use. For post-16, we always risk assess providers. That's an ongoing annual thing that happens. Historically, we have used achievement data as a large part of the risk assessment. We've moved away from that quite considerably when we move to the education inspection framework. We take a lot of other things into consideration, soft information that we receive that comes in, information that members of the public give us, our own knowledge of providers, and our work with the ESFA and other funding people in the Department for Education. So the risk assessment of providers will continue and goes hand in hand with what we're finding from the pilots and the research and evaluation activity. So we've got to be realistic that data for one measure of risk assessment is going to be largely, well, going to be very little use, isn't it? Because we've seen huge changes in the volumes of contracts. We've got 2 years now of A-levels and GCSE results, and all the vocational qualifications that have been teacher assessed or have been assessed in other ways. So data as it is a very small part of our risk assessment. So I thought it was useful to share that, because I regularly get emails from providers saying, you know, our data is an absolute mess and I'm really worried that's going to bring us forward for inspection. And it isn't. You know, we are where we are with data. So please don't be concerned about that. Considerations and mitigations that we put in place. We always take into consideration the local information that we have. We take into consideration the contract sizes that you have, the changes in contract sizes. We take into consideration when there's been a change of a senior leader. All of these sorts of things are important to us, as well as any self-assessment that you may care to share with us, which there's no obligation for you to do, and the provider survey that you do every year when you say the times of the year when it's not ideal for us to come out to you. So there's an awful lot of stuff that goes into risk assessment. I would say that there's two things to reflect on. The first thing to reflect on is I always say, please don't worry when Ofsted's coming, because you just get on doing the job that you do, and that's, you know, we will find you as we do. So don't spend time trying to second guess when they're coming. The second thing to consider is that we have made changes to the handbook because we stopped the inspection timetable in terms of the amount of time between somebody getting a requires improvement judgment, for example, and then a re-inspection. We stopped the clock on the 18th of March 2020. The handbook has been evaluated to take a consideration of that. And the timelines, you know, if you were going into the pandemic expecting to have a re-inspection ASAP, everything has been moved on. So those are all considerations that we've talked about. What we are doing though is we are returning to, and we have returned to, the final bullet, which is inspections of independent learning providers, to those ILPs that are predominantly straightforward in terms of their curriculum offer. So it's one area of learning or one provision type that we've risk assessed, and we feel we are able to go out and inspect under the education inspection framework. Most of the ILPs, that are actually all of the ILP inspections that are happening, full inspections, are of providers that have had their new provider monitoring visit pre-pandemic and are in scope for inspection. So we've risk assessed to make sure that those providers are, we're able to look at the full range of their teaching, learning and assessment and the whole of their quality of their provision. We've continued on with our new provider monitoring visits. We have very many providers that have new contracts, including AEB contracts that we haven't yet been to. So those providers that haven't yet had a visit are in scope to be inspected, and we'll carry on throughout the summer months to doing those. And as you will all know, there's a contracting process at the moment for AEB, so we'll have possibly new providers there that will be included in new provider monitoring visits. So those are the 2-day visits when we look at the 3 themes of does the provider, do leaders and managers understand the programme and what's required of the programme, what's the quality of training, and are learners effectively safeguarded. We are doing some of our re-inspection monitoring visits to those providers that are in scope for that. So those providers that had requires improvement judgment before the pandemic, that we will go back and do a monitoring visit. We have had, we covered quite a few of those visits by proxy in January, February time, when we were doing performance monitoring visits, which could be used as a proxy for a re-inspection monitoring visit. That said, there's been quite a few providers in the East of England, certainly, that have said we'd rather have a formal re-inspection monitoring visit as well as the PMV, so we're going ahead with those. And we are doing safeguarding visits. We've had a number of safeguarding visits across the country in post-16. They fall into a couple of categories, really. We have the whistleblowing that we always respond to, and even throughout the pandemic we went out and did safeguarding visits when we had whistleblowing instances. And we've had quite a few of new providers that we've gone out to do a new provider monitoring visit to, where we found their safeguarding arrangements to be insufficient, and so we have gone out and gone back to them and done a safeguarding monitoring visit. And we've also had instances across the country where, when we've gone to a new provider who has, very often providers have had a subcontract for a very long time and have then become a prime contractor, where we found their safeguarding arrangements to be insufficient. So we've then gone back to look at the prime holder, contract holder, to see what's happening there. So that's sort of the range of the visits that we've done. And I imagine these these 4 visits of types will carry on through until the end of August. And when we know what our next steps are in terms of a full return to the education inspection framework, we will obviously communicate that to everybody as a matter of urgency through webinars and other events that we would do to broadcast that. So that's me, Ian. If there's anything else that people would like to ask.
That's great, Jules. I think, as I say, we'll just do that when Ros has had a chance just to give her presentation, because I think she's going to let me introduce everyone. First of all, let me welcome some newcomers, because I think some colleagues have joined the webinar after the beginning, so welcome. And we're here, as you know, to talk about focusing on digital and our experience through the pandemic and also post-pandemic in terms of practice. And Ros Parker, who is the the principal for Southend Adult Community College, who participated, I think, in one of the pilots that Jules mentioned, is going to just now talk a little bit about her experience of being a participant in the pilot and what she's learned and what we can learn from her experience. So over to you, Ros. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Jules. Yeah, we volunteered to be part of the pilot inspection and led it in exactly the same way as we would if it was a real inspection. So we didn't tell staff until we got the official call, which was in the shape of an email this time, and then a planning call afterwards. And everything after that followed through in the same way as it does an ordinary inspection. So the reason we went for the inspection, I've been in post for just 2 years. And of course, as you know, more than a year of that has been in a pandemic and various lockdowns. And our college stayed open throughout. We didn't close at all, mainly because we have provision for young people, but also we repurposed the college and utilised our catering staff to prepare meals for the homeless. So we did about 4,500 meals throughout the spring and summer of last year to ensure that we were fulfilling our purpose as a community college. And we felt very much that actually, as well as getting all of our learners online within 48 hours, it was also really important that we played a critical role in serving our local community. Thank you. So just to share with you a little bit of background and context really. So we developed our strategy and our purpose alongside our community partners, employers. Before we went into lockdown, this was one of the first things I did. So it was very much a staff and community effort to find a real vision and purpose for our organisation that resonated with our local community. And the one thing that people kept feeding back was that it was very homely, and they liked that and felt safe in our environment and were safe. So our vision became to create a home of learning where everyone achieves their full potential. And what we were aiming to do is attract local people into learning and skills that did change their lives for the better. We revisited our values, and then we've tested all of this, our intent and how we implement our curriculum. We've tested all of that in the throughout the pandemic, and it really stood up actually. So we redid our logo. As you can see, we took on the rainbow and a "Here for You" context as well. Now, this was quite symbolic because we really wanted to put a message out there that we are here for our local community and we are here for individuals, and we would continue that learning that was making such an impact on people's lives and keeping their mental health in a different space compared to if we weren't there serving our community. So we have around 2,500 learners annually in general context. We run apprenticeships, we have large adult skills provision and large community learning provision. We also have SEND provision and a discrete higher needs provision. We have a centre for higher needs. We also have 16 to 19 study programme provision. All of those aspects were in scope for this inspection. It was operated as a full inspection. Obviously, no judgments were made and no grade was given, but each of those areas of provision were inspected. You may know that we offer a very small 14 to 16 provision that we do alongside our virtual school, the local authority and local schools, but obviously that's not in scope for this inspection. Our vocational offer includes construction. So we do building services engineering. Predominantly, we're looking at multi-trades in there. We're not specialising in any of the areas. And generally, this is set at level 1. It's a real entry level. Majority of our young people are those who are the most disadvantaged, come from deprived areas, who have not succeeded in the education system previously, and the construction program, which I started when I joined, is probably one of our largest programs with young people. The health and social care is another area that we specialise in, alongside business administration, which does include customer service. What that's going to enable us to do next year is develop our provision in vocational pathways, but focusing on customer service. So although somebody may have an aspiration to become a hairdresser, we'll be tackling the customer service side of that, which is a really important component. And employers tell us that what's really important for them is to have young people and adults who have got good communication skills, good team working skills, and have the ability to adapt to changing situations. We also offer accountancy and childcare. So that's just a little bit of background about who we are, and also about the context for the inspection. It was a full inspection and operated in that way. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have to admit to once putting forward on a Friday afternoon, yes, we'd love to be part of the pilot. As time started to get closer to that point, I was wondering what had possessed me to do that. But I was really glad we did. We did nothing differently, and we behaved in exactly the same way as it was just normal days in the college. We did not open during the weekend and get everybody in. I absolutely insisted that we would be ourselves, and that's what I wanted us to. Well, that's what I wanted us to have, and I wanted that to be what the inspectors saw too. So where I've put the keep calm and carry on, that wasn't actually about me. That was about the way in which the inspection was carried out. The inspection was very calm. It was an incredibly calm process. The college felt calm. Stress levels were very low, and I think that the team carried out their inspection with great empathy and consideration for the context that we're in, and great professionalism. It was an incredibly constructive process. As far as I was concerned, I was using it as an opportunity to validate where I believe the organisation is and to support the recommendations that I was putting forward as a point of view from an external review, which I think was a really critical time for us, because I was about to make changes before we went into lockdown, and I put a stall on that and then put all my energies into ensuring that the team was supported, that we had good wellbeing programs for staff in place, and that we had our learning online, and that we were supporting our community. But now's the time to start moving on to the next stage and looking at how we improve what we do in the light of the fact that our context has changed, not just now, but for the future of adult and community learning. So some of the activities were face-to-face. I had learners in, my learners came back very early. I've had learners in all the way through lockdown because I have 16 to 19 and other vulnerable groups, and I've stayed open for that. And as soon as we could start bringing back adults, we did, because we felt that we could do that in a safe way. We'd undertaken rigorous risk assessments. We'd set up our own testing site here, COVID-19 testing site here, with support of public health, to create the safest environment possible where people could start to get back to their learning and carry on that journey that had been so disrupted throughout the year. So inspectors came in, they went and visited classes face to face. They operated in a COVID compliant way, as you would expect. So one where we operate across 3 centres, one inspector was in one of the centres and didn't cut across other centres. Another one was in another centre and didn't cut across centres. So we were able to maintain our bubbles, which was really helpful at the time. So face-to-face learning was seen, and again, as you would expect, like any inspection, a lot of interaction with the learners and with the tutors to triangulate the information. I did look at blended. We have blended and live streaming. So where we've got some learners learning from home still and some learners in the classroom, they were able to see the live streaming activity as well, where the tutor was having to navigate that in the classroom and at home learning. And they did look at remote learning, where we had completely learning online only, and how that was being accessed and how learners were being supported. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to just pull out some of the key learning points. Obviously, Jules has given us the detail about some of the challenges across the board, and I just wanted to share with you some of the things, standout things. I've got an awful lot of learning. I have an entire report that we've written, Ofsted on a pilot inspection, as you know, don't leave you with the report, but obviously we've taken all of that learning into report, which is informing our quality improvement measures going forward. But I wanted to pull out some of those key learning things for us that were quite significant. So the scale and type of provision that inspectors were able to see at the time they came in within community learning, we still hadn't been able to access all of our community venues, and we still can't access all of them. Community partners were not engaging with other groups such as us. They were just dealing with the essential critical services they were providing with their client groups, so they didn't want us coming in. Schools, children's centres, again, they were dealing with their own challenges of trying to manage their own situation, didn't want us coming in, adding to that. So the type of provision that inspectors were able to actually observe was not so much all of our community learning off-site and in the community and our hardest to reach groups. All of our street sleepers and homeless were being housed still, and the priority wasn't about bringing them out of that housing and into learning. And so all of that work wasn't able to be seen. All of our work with our local charities and community partners, which had paused, that wasn't able to be seen. So what was actually seen was some of our more traditional learning, shall I say, where learners were coming together, absolutely critical, and I don't call them soft skills anymore since COVID, critical skills around social impact of community learning, which I believe we should really bring back as a value statement of community learning. And it's not a soft outcome, it's an absolutely critical part of community learning, that social benefit, where we have seen people's mental health deteriorate because of a lack of social interaction. And community learning is one of those areas that really contributes to people's positive mental health and well-being. So although that more traditional side was seen, inside all of those classes, as you know, are many people with different, they come with different backgrounds and different stories, but the predominance of what they saw would have been some of what you would more class as some of that traditional community learning, because that was what was accessible and what we could bring back, and how we were trying to integrate the community with some confidence in going out again. People were coming to us, as I'm sure they've been coming to you, and saying, if it hadn't been for the fact that I was coming into college, I wouldn't have been able to have the confidence to go shopping again. I wouldn't have had the confidence to go and get my own food. And it's those kind of things that you realise the impact of community learning over and above all of the other aspects that we know are really important. So that only being able to see that type of provision obviously does limit an ability for Ofsted to make a judgment on all of your other external work that actually is probably greater and larger than the extent of that type of provision. Another part was that pedagogical piece. So as we've all done, you went across online, and we're all amazed at how quickly our tutors and staff adapted to working from home and teaching online. And it was a remarkable effort. I remember saying to my staff and partners in an event that I was doing, I want you to imagine the future in 5 years' time. Everything's online. We've now got robots. We've taken over a shop in the high street, and we're live streaming from other countries. And little did I know in the January, we'd be looking at a situation like that ourselves. Because if we'd have planned something like this, we'd have said, right, we need a project manager, we need to get a bid, we need funding for all of this, and we'll put it down as a 5-year project. And yet overnight, in effect, all of our tutors were converting to online learning. We were grabbing resources wherever we could to facilitate that and keep people learning and active in their local community, as you all have too. And it is a remarkable effort. And we've done a lot of work with tutors and through training programs that have been through the national networks and through our own, on getting people used to adapting to that and learning from it. What we haven't tackled, and this came out in inspection, and I think that is the next stage, what didn't come out is how have we worked on the pedagogical approaches of tutors when delivering online learning or blended learning, because it isn't the same as just delivering what you'd planned to deliver in a classroom. It is entirely different, and we haven't got there yet, without doubt. That is something that we are now working on about, okay, so how can we adapt the techniques and opportunities for tutors to really change and shape their provision for the future if they're delivering online. The next bit was about intent and implementation. The strategic intent was relatively easy to demonstrate across the board because we'd already set that intent way before COVID, and we'd adapted some of our approaches and adapted our implementation. So it's easier to demonstrate than the impact. And the impact was really challenging to demonstrate because of the pandemic, and that has had an impact on demonstrating learner progress and their aspirations for the future, because they've had this huge disruption. So demonstrating the impact of the learning at the time when inspectors came in was a huge challenge. Everybody was terribly grateful to be here, and everybody was learning and enjoying the skills they were undertaking, but actually the impact of that learning was a real challenge to try and shape. The next part that we found a bit of a challenge was the progress side and demonstrating the progress learners were making from their starting point. So their starting points were really clear, but with all of the disruptions in their learning, it obviously meant there were gaps, and it obviously meant we needed to adapt our sequencing of the curriculum. And that obviously had a knock-on impact on learner progress and how they had adapted. And then that led on to the next part, which was about, well, how clear are learners on their next steps and what they're going to progress into. And the impact, again, I strongly believe that the reason that was so prevalent is because people came with their starting point. Their starting point had been disrupted, and their original intention and what they were going to get out of that learning experience had also changed because of the disruption, not just in their learning, but the disruption in their lives. Suddenly they were having to learn at home whilst having their children at home and educating their children at home. Our tutors were having to deal with a situation where they had children at home were teaching them whilst they were having to think about how they were going to teach their learners. And so all of these disruptions in learning had an impact on that. But equally, people's lives had dramatically changed. Their view on their work life had changed. Some of them had lost jobs that were furloughed. So what they started off with their intention when they joined the class actually was quite different. So they were still reflecting on that starting point and struggling to see how that starting point was going to lead to any next steps, because actually they didn't know what the next steps were because we were in such a time of uncertainty. So they were the key learning points. Obviously, we found it a really positive experience and we got an awful lot of positives out of it. But I wanted to show you some of the things that I thought might be similar for you as well. So next slide, please. So in summary, it was really useful. It was definitely a collaborative process. We felt like we were working alongside the inspection team, and it was an incredibly useful, informative process. As many of you may have also been through several restructures when I joined, people were fairly new in their roles, and this was excellent training and development for staff to enable them to have the tools they needed to do the new role and make that step change. So this was an incredibly good training experience and development for staff, particularly as none of them had been in a role in inspection previously. So it was a really good, and I used it very much as a developmental tool for staff. So I did have a nominee and a shadow nominee because I wanted to develop as many staff as possible to be exposed to that real experience of Ofsted inspection and to hear the messages directly from the Ofsted inspectors so that we could move on at a pace coming out of the pandemic. The external reviews really validated some of my findings over the last year, and it's really informed and enabled us to prioritise our actions going forward. In a time where you're coming out of a pandemic, it's quite easy to see lots and lots of things that need to be done, but actually prioritizing the critical actions and functions is absolutely essential. And as well as this external review, I'd also had an external review done on my younger people's provision pretty much alongside this as well. The thing I would say is that everything hinged on impact. That's impact of the pandemic on staff and learners, the impact of the pandemic on learning, and the impact of the pandemic on learners' progression and opportunities for the future. And that was what really resonated for me. And so my whole journey now is about making sure that we're having a positive impact on staff, on learners, and on the world of work and our wider community. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Ros, that's brilliant. Thank you. That's really comprehensive, and really interesting to hear about everything that you've learned from taking part in the pilot. It sounds like it was a really positive experience for you and the service. So, well done for having the courage as well, for putting your hand up to take part, because it was a voluntary thing. And I know, as you say, there would have been a moment when you probably thought, why did I do that? But obviously it really was worthwhile, and you gained a lot from it, and that's really helpful. So that's great. I'm conscious that we are running a little bit behind time, and that's my fault because I am obviously not chairing this as well as I should. What I suggest is that we can progress straight through now to the presentation from Vikki. And I think if we have questions for Jules, Ros and Vikki, we can probably take those at the end, if that's okay with everyone. So let me introduce Vikki Liogier, who's the National Head of Education, Tech and Digital Skills Education for the Education and Training Foundation. Vikki is going to present some of the differences between face-to-face and online delivery sessions. It hopefully we'll pick up some of the things that Ros has been talking about in terms of the importance of pedagogy and actually adjusting how you deliver, and the kind of almost like the underpinning, the theoretical underpinning of teaching approaches that has to be different when you're delivering either blended learning or face-to-face or online. So I think this will be very, very interesting. So over to Vikki.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this session today. So I'm going to talk to you, as Jan mentioned, about GTF, Enhanced Learning Ecosystem. And for those of you who may not be aware of who we are, the Education and Training Foundation is the expert professional development and standard body in further education and training in England. So 4 key points to my presentation. I'm going to very quickly give you differences between face-to-face, online and hybrid deliveries. Then we'll look at the impact those changes are having on managers and teaching staff, and then look at how to optimize support with the enhanced digital teaching platform. And then hopefully we'll have time for a very short conclusion and Q&A. So in terms of understanding the differences between face-to-face and online learning, there are 3 key differences: technical, behavioral, and delivery. So face-to-face, a session may be enhanced through technologies. However, as soon as you move to online learning, you're going to be reliant to technology as a facilitator. That means that you need access to technology in terms of device and connectivity. And you also need to know how to navigate the different applications and the digital skills to work with them. While you will be using assistive technologies on a face-to-face basis, as soon as you move to online, you're going to widen the scope of assistive technologies. And the balance between curriculum and pedagogy needs a third ingredient, which is that technology balance. So you've got 3 main elements here. In terms of behavioral, your classroom rules and will become etiquette. So you need to take into consideration constructive feedback and conversations online, as well as managing learners' expectations, making sure they are inclusive and building the soft skills. And we know that working remotely is far more challenging for learners who may not have those independent study skills as yet. And then, of course, there's a level of confidence and well-being and the safeguarding of our learners.
Sorry, Vikki, can I just ask, you're currently sharing your screen, but you haven't got it in the kind of, the screen you're sharing with. This is not the presentation view, so we can we're only seeing like a small amount of the slide. Would it be possible to kind of share the screen that has this as the presentation, and then I think it will be easier for colleagues to see. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, of course, no problem. Let me just go back. So I'll go back here. Sorry, I'll have to start with my slides again. Can you see my slides now? Yeah.
Yes, that's much better. I think we can still, it's still got them listed down this left. That's better. That's perfect. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, so and then in terms of, so I've mentioned that in terms of delivery, as we've spoke of earlier on, and Ros mentioned it as well, it's about creating and adapting to learning content to be delivered remotely and redefining our pedagogic approaches in order to work with synchronous and asynchronous learning. Okay, so when we look at hybrid learning, of course, we're going to have the technical. So let me define what I understand by hybrid learning. Is when you are going to facilitate a delivery where half or a number of your learners are attending face-to-face, while another cohort will be attending the session remotely. And therefore, you're going to have to combine the face-to-face teaching and learning as well as the online, and create a new balance, which is going to be curriculum, space differentiated pedagogy and technology. So it's really about really reframing the learning activities so that you can adapt content so that depending on the space the learners are participating from, they will be having different type of activities and supporting each other. So it's really about thinking about what it is that you can deliver before the session in a kind of flipped model in terms of sharing knowledge and cognitive aspect, and then bringing the high level activities face to face. And so what can be carried out on site, and how learners who are attending remotely can really support those learners who are carrying on higher level activities on site. What can be done in person and what can be done online, and what is best done online. So for instance, learners who are joining remotely can very well be the critical friend, can very well carry observation of activities and ask questions to the active learner who is on site. Of course, both classroom rules and etiquette will need to be applied, and new rules of engagement need to be very clearly defined. And as soon as you frame activities remotely, then they need to be very clearly discussed and presented. So what are the impact on managers and teachers? Well, of course, it's going to be about how do I deal with, and we've got a number of elements here which were discussed early on. It's about learners' engagement and performance. It's about supporting, it's about personal well-being, and it's also about how do I support learners in terms of independent learning, building that sense of belonging to a community and social interaction, which are so important when you are in that kind of environment, and the quality of learning, of course. Now, you'll be delighted to know that on the Enhanced Digital Teaching Platform, we develop a connected and effective CPD set of resources. It consists of 4 PDF and 6 micro-learning modules of about 8 to 10 minutes each. And they focus on delivering remotely, essentially. So it's about building engagement and progress. it's about how to induct learners remotely, and it's about also how to measure performance and assure quality of delivery. Now, delivering remotely or in hybrid will automatically mean redefining pedagogic approaches, and meaning shifting from teaching as providing information to creating learning environment and opportunities. And the teacher's role is very much that mentor, the guide, who will help learners to take ownership of that learning. And obviously it needs to be engaging, effective, and inclusive. So a consideration would be to have a fixed time for key synchronous learning events, and which needs to be far more shorter than they would be normally. And have a timeline. Obviously, if you are delivering a flipped model, some knowledge and facts asynchronously, it's important for you to actually think of a time frame for this asynchronous learning, so that you can be sure that learning has taken place and that learning is sticking. And then, of course, you need that one-to-one and small slots for smaller groups for tutorial as well, to make sure that everybody is up to date and up to scratch. So how do you optimize support? When you optimize support, you're going to look at raising the standards. So it's about raising the line of the minimum standard for low performers, shifting the average, and obviously stretching the top. So how do we do this? Well, on a short term, it's about making sure that no one is left behind. So think about your timetable, asynchronous versus asynchronous, face-to-face versus online, and hybrid. So what is best delivered online, what is best delivered face-to-face, and so on. Technology, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be robust and accessible. Accessible in all the meaning of it, meaning in terms of connectivity, device, and accessibility. In terms of policy, it's about having a guide to inform online practices within the organization, and perhaps identify those applications that are essential to be used within the organization. And the smaller they are, the better to start with, so that everybody's got those basic skills. In terms of duplication, try to avoid them, work effectively and efficiently together so that you don't reinvent the wheel. And in terms of digital capability, it's about CPD to be available and to be differentiated. Now, the Enhanced Digital Teaching Platform was launched in January 2019, and I'm delighted to say that in February 2020, a year later, it was awarded the EdTech 50 Award and recognized as a major product to support EdTech in the sector. 2 programs are hosted on Enhance, an EdTech program and an Essential Digital Skills CPD program. We've got a guide to EdTech and Digital Skills CPD, and I've shared this in the chat just before my session. The EdTech program is underpinned by the National Digital Teaching Professional Framework, and it's to help practitioners in delivering, in embedding EdTech in their practice and redefine their pedagogic approaches. The framework and the program is designed to respond to self-identified, just-in-time training needs. And we've adopted a butterfly approach to this end. So it's to respond to our immediacy mindset. This is the framework. It was developed in collaboration with JISC. It builds from the 6 elements of digital capability from JISC, as well as 20 professional standards for EFI and the DIC Compédu for the European Commission. It's structured in a linear manner on the teacher's journey, but it's not meant to be approached in a linear way. It's very much an aspirational framework. And we've got 3 stages of performance here. Exploring is for those of us who don't know anything about EdTech. The second one is about adopting. So for those of us, and most of us today, who are embedding some digital within our delivery, And a leading stage is for those more advanced who will support others and will be able to critique what EdTech may be more suited for a given learning context. You can navigate, as I said, in terms of aspirational framework in a butterfly manner to just do as you want, or you can progress horizontally across the 7 competencies within one stage of performance. So for instance, we've identified 12 modules that correspond to about 60 minutes of training for beginners in EdTech, so low performance teachers in terms of EdTech. You can also navigate through it vertically, so within one competency and across 3 stages of performance, exploring, adopting, and leading. And for that, for instance, for category E, which is about assessment and feedback, we've identified 11 modules that can help you. Exploring modules here, adopting, and then some leading ones as well. And then we've created a theme-based progression. So think about it as a kind of snake and ladder progression, and across the 7 competencies. And those are based around themes. So for instance, here we've got the one which is addressing the knowledge agenda. And that's about, we've identified 8 modules. 4 are looking at cognitive theories, dual coding, principles of instructions. And then you've got the application of those 4 theory modules as well. On the enhanced digital teaching platform, we also have the essential digital skills CPD training, which is aimed at those members of staff who will or are delivering the new qualifications related to the entitlement, the digital entitlement to adults with no or low digital skills. It is underpinned by the essential digital skills framework from DFE, and it has got a very guided approach. That means you do need to register for this program. You do need to take a self-assessment, which will give you a capability profile, and then it will give you pointers across the 5 categories within it. And for each of the categories, you'll have some teaching exemplars, scenarios, and guidance. And we've got 2 synoptic modules focusing on the pedagogic aspect of delivering digital skills to learners with no or low digital skills. And then you've got communities of practice where we can come back together to really share pedagogic approaches. In terms of learning spaces, we're really building communities of practice on the Enhance. It is an environment and space where we look at sharing resources as well as pedagogic approaches, and really supporting one another in a sustainable manner. So we've got 2 main type of communities of practice, one for the essential digital skills and the other one for the EdTech. Let me tell you a bit more about EdTech. We've got a section in terms of module, in terms of badges. So when you complete a cluster of modules on the EdTech program, you're going to get automatically 1-star badge, and you can see those are 1-star badges. That just means that it recognizes your commitment to your self-development. The 2nd-star badge will be awarded when you share a reflection on the impact the training has had on your practice, and or the intention, or your intention of embedding the training within your practice if it's at the exploring stage. And when you gain a 3-star badge, you'll gain it by sharing a resource that you have created or adapted which is aligned to the training and the impact it has had on the learning experience of your learners. Now, we've created a critical reflection scaffold to really help you build that sort of effective critical reflection on the learning that you have experienced. And at the back end of it, we know that feedback is an essential part of learning. And we've got we offer 2 fully personalized feedback on any submitted reflection to really encourage that sort of constructive development of your practice. And then if you've opted in, once you've been awarded, you're going to, your practice is going to be displayed on our awarded wall on Enhance. And that means that what we want to do is to build the co-creation of knowledge and through pedagogic dialogue, so that by sharing a reflection on your practice and how you've managed to redefine it through training, then someone else is going to come in and ask for guidance on taking that practice and perhaps embedding it within a different learning context. As you can see, we've embedded number of social media type of behavior. So you can follow a contributor, you can like practice, you can bookmark it, and you can also comment on it. We've also very recently in December 2020 created 2 new roles within Enhance. The super contributor, whose role is to really build that engagement and ignite that discussion in the first place on the communities of practice, and the reviewer, so that what we want is to create a practice that is practitioner-led for practitioners, so something very sustainable really, and for practitioners to actually become reviewers in their own right and build from looking at others' practices. In the back end of the platform and at the back end of the 2 programs, we've got your management dashboard, which is really to help providers to really capitalize on the free resources in EdTech and essential digital skills available for FE providers, and really look at designing CPD programs and looking at the effectiveness and the badges earned and that kind of thing. And then finally, in terms of conclusion, I'm conscious that I may be slightly short of time. In terms of long term, it's really about rethinking the way we operate and building a growth mindset and making sure that all the processes and structure within the organization are supporting the ethos. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. I've shared the slides, so you will have all the links embedded within the slides as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Vikki. That was really very fascinating, and lots of ground covered there. So thank you very much. And also, it's really interesting to see what a range of supporting materials and resources have been developed by the ETF and that are available for us as providers to access for free to help to support in developing CPD and other programs to help our colleagues to be able to make the continue their journey in adapting their practice for this new, well, newer way of operating that we're now all of us I think embracing much more than ever before. So we're coming towards the final furlong of the webinar. What I would like to do is just to ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to put to either Jules, Ros, or Vikki about what you've just heard. If you could put it in the chat, and I will attempt to pick up the question and put it to the relevant person. And I will. So over to you, colleagues, if you have any questions on the presentation, because I know a lot of ground was covered and a lot of information was passed across. So I'm sure you may have some questions you'd like to ask. I have one for Vikki, if I may, just in terms of the CPD that you mentioned, and the fact that there's kind of a level 1 essential digital skills, and it's one that you have to register for and then undertake an initial assessment, and then you can participate in that. Is that also a free resource, Vikki? Is that something that can be accessed for free?
Yes, it's free.
Brilliant.
Yes, totally. raise an echo. Okay, yes, it is totally free. The only difference between the two learners' journey is that on EdTech, it's aimed to be responding to immediacy, that immediacy mindset. And therefore, you don't even need to register. You can just literally access the module as and when you want. Obviously, if you do register, you're going to benefit from a far more personalized experience because we've got artificial intelligence in the back end, which will recommend based on your previous learning, specific modules that you can progress towards to. The learning journey from GDS is slightly different because it was informed through BMG research that we conducted, 4 months research conducted across 70 organizations to look at the skills gap of teachers and trainers who were delivering essential ICT functional skills and who would need to deliver the new essential digital skills entitlement. And based on this, we identified a very spiky profile of practitioners, and therefore we felt it was important for the practitioners to actually register, to do that self-assessment and just give pointers to those pieces of learning that are most important for them to fill their gap so that they wouldn't waste any time. We know time is one of the major barriers to professional development, and therefore we felt it was really needed. But the two programs are totally free. The management dashboard, there's a free subscription to FE providers who are funded by ESFA. However, any other providers will have a small fee, but the fee is tiny, and I can put the link if you want in the chat so that you can look at it if you're interested.
That would be really helpful, Vikki. Thank you. And thank you for confirming that. That's really great. And actually, in the chat, Fiona Bell has just mentioned that her staff have been accessing and they found the experience to be really, really good and really helpful in terms of being able to close skills gaps and extend tutors' knowledge. So there's actually some real life, kind of real-time feedback there for you, Vikki, that colleagues are finding it, the materials and undertaking the learning is a really actually positive experience and is helping tutors to develop their skills. So that's good feedback to get in real time. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think one thing which is very important as well is that the digital teaching professional framework is focused on pedagogic approaches. So we removed the digital skills sort of aspect barrier in individuals' mindsets. So and it is now underpinned by 175 micro-learning modules. So it's hopefully helpful. Well, it's been very helpful to practitioners generally. And thank you, Fiona, for your feedback.
That's great, and thanks, Alex, for putting the link in as well so the link's been put in the chat so colleagues can follow that link, and obviously we'll be sending out to colleagues as well more information, and saying you're welcome, which is nice. Right, I think we're in the final furlong, so I would first of all say that if colleagues would like to send any suggestions or notes on this webinar, that would be really helpful. And I think Sarah has created a email link for that, which may be coming up on a slide, which will be helpful. And we're also beginning to look ahead to our next event for LEAFEA, which will be in the summer or autumn. And we want to send out a survey to all LEAFEA and EAAL Impact Forum members to get your input and basically on what you might be interested in and what preferences you might have, both in terms of what content we should do and also in terms of, and Sarah shared, thanks Sarah, in the chat, not only what the content ought to be, but how we ought to go about it, because we're in that kind of transition, aren't we? That cusp where we're waiting for the 19th of July, the final kind of step on the roadmap, whether or not we will be better off doing the next session actually as a kind of face-to-face or continue to do it as a remote session, or perhaps do it as a blended approach where it can be accessed both physically and remotely at the same time. Who knows? But it'd be interesting to hear feedback and comments from you, because there are lots of arguments and positivities for doing it remotely. I think colleagues have been able to access sometimes things that they would have otherwise struggled to access if they'd had to physically get to London or something for an event. So I think there are lots of positives to take forward. And as I say, Sarah's shared her email address in the chat, which is fantastic. So I think then all that remains for me to do is to just thank our three speakers this morning and into the afternoon. So that's Jules from Ofsted. Thank you. That was really informative, and it's really helpful to get an insight into where Ofsted are at this point, because again, it is a kind of an interesting transition point as the Ofsted starts to do face-to-face inspections again. I think you have started, I think, back in May, but it's obviously going to kind of, for the whole of the sector, it will pick up in for the academic year 21-22. So that's really helpful. And it's particularly focused on digital and blended learning and all that feedback from those pilots. Ros, brilliant to give the experience of an actual participant provider that took part, had the bravery to put their hand up and take part in the pilot. So thank you for sharing that. Really interesting. It sounds like it's a very positive experience and lots of positives to be taken. And last but not least, thanks to Vikki for sharing that update on the ETF and all of the fantastic resources that are available to support further education providers and their staff in terms of improving their confidence, their skills. And also, I like the idea that there are lots of communities where colleagues can actually share best practice and support one another online. So that, because the best tips often are the ones that come from colleagues that are actually facing the difficulties that you're facing. And sometimes it's just nice to be reassured that what you're doing is actually okay, and that you're doing a good job as well. That's just nice to know, to check that what your experience is positive. So I just for Monica, thank you. That's a really very nice comment. I apologise for any failures in chairing, because they're all down to me. But thanks again to the speakers. Thank you all for taking part. And I hope we'll be able to come back together as a community of colleagues in the late summer and into the autumn. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.